for more on this, I'm joined by Vygaudas Usackas, former Lithuanian diplomat who served as the EU's ambassador to Russia. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So we're just currently getting some updates right now that are saying the European leaders have arrived at the White House. So it's all happening. How unprecedented is a meeting on this scale? And are European leaders there just really supporting Zelensky so there's no repeat of that showdown we saw in the Oval Office back in February?
Well, absolutely. It's a tipping point in European history and from our perspective, even in the world history, because the fate of the sovereign country, independent country, which was attacked unprovokedly by Russia 3 years ago through conventional means, and now, the deal is being made. We just saw last Friday Putin and Trump rolling out the sleeves and using the red carpet reception in Alaska to start that diplomatic process. So for Europeans, it's a few-fold feeling. First, for me, as the first European Union ambassador after 2009, when the Lisbon Treaty came into force, it's disappointing to see that the future of Europe is decided not in Europe, but at the White House in Washington, D.C. On the other hand, that demonstrates that reality, who is the boss of the Western world. So United States remains the major, and the key player. Certainly, of course, it's unprecedented in a way that you have half a dozen, not all Europeans, but half a dozen leaders, including heads of European Commission and NATO, are now at the White House in support of Zelensky. And last, I think what is most important is not so much that they're going to support morally, psychologically, and try to mitigate the repetition of the February meeting, of the clash between Zelensky and Trump and Vance. But I think from the President Trump's perspective, what matters, and for Zelensky too, what those half a dozen of European leaders are bringing to the table. What's going to be European contribution to the future implementation of the ceasefire or peace deal with Russia, and what kind of role Europe will play, because at this stage, with all due respect, Europe was kind of in a geopolitical irrelevance.
So it's really interesting because what you just said to me really stood out. What are Europeans going to bring to the table? Because obviously there's something we don't know, because following Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, we don't know what Russia offered the US. And now there's concerns that Donald Trump is going to give the Russian president everything he wants. So how important is today's White House meeting for the future of European security too? Because, it seems like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin set the precedent for how this war should end.
Well, it's of paramount importance for Europe and for the world, from my perspective. Again, because the war is taking place on the European continent, and Europeans at the end of the day will have to contribute to resolution of that. So what Europeans can do, and I think there is a greater realization, although belatedly, after almost a year when President Trump is in power, Europeans started to realize and understand that you have to talk to Donald Trump in the same language, the language of real estate dealer, a person, a businessman who likes to make a deal and who talks in language of contracts and signing agreements. So Europeans have finally understood that in order to retain American presence in Europe, political, military, intelligence, and diplomatic, as we see, we'll have to pay. So that's why the last NATO summit has increased commitment of defense budget by member states to up to 5%. So that's the first one. Secondly, we'll have to pay for American support to Ukrainians, which have started literally about a month ago. And last but not least is going to be, about something which is still unclear, and I hope we will learn after today's meeting of leaders in the White House, what kind of security guarantees, robust, a kind of NATO security guarantees, Putin and Trump have discussed. And, we know on the one hand that the entire war launched by Russia have started very much because Putin did not want to see, and he wanted to refute American increased role in Ukraine, especially defense and intelligence-wise. So for me, it's hard to believe that Putin would acquiesce American security guarantees, which would equal to defense of territory and stationing of American troops on the ground. What he may acquiesce and accept is European security guarantees to Ukraine, which, from Putin's perspective, does not entail, does not present an immediate military danger, because none of Europeans have capacity to fight alone and to win over Russia. At this stage, we can do it only with American backup and with American leadership. So, but it is at the, in the final stage, it's clear that Europeans will have to contribute both financially, so that we retain American military dominance in terms of continuous military supplies for Ukrainians to fight potentially with Russians. And secondly, there is a requirement to have a deterrent force, something which would deter Russia from repetition of the military activities.
And sorry, can I just interrupt you there? Because actually, I did want to ask you about that at the moment, because President Zelensky is speaking ahead of this meeting with European leaders and Donald Trump. He said we should not expect Putin to drop his plans for further aggression. And we saw overnight that Russia launched attacks on Ukraine. They say at least 10 people were killed. So the big question is your experience with Russia. Do you think Russia has any interest at all in ending this war and coming to a peace?
Well, that's a good question. From my point of view, reading Vladimir Putin and knowing him personally, he retains that goal to control Ukraine. At the same time, Russia has also paid a big price. We don't know exactly, because it's not transparent and open society and the government, so we don't know how many hundreds of thousands Russians died and what's the state of economy. But clearly, they're going through the painful period when it comes to economic, financial, and human. So, the question is, that's the first one. The second, for Putin, what matters, his goal is not to reconcile with Zelensky. He wants to make a deal with Trump. He wants to make a deal with the United States of America, the superpower of the world, so as to ensure that there is a division of spheres of influence, because Putin thinks in those terms of spheres of influence, and that there is no presence of American troops on the ground which would endanger Russian security. So that's his ultimate goal, while at the same time, one should not be naive, as President Zelensky and many Europeans are not naive, that Putin will continue to try to destabilize Ukraine, and probably one day would wish to see his own man in Kiev.
And just a quick question before I let you go. You said you know President Putin personally. What kind of man is he, and what kind of negotiator is Vladimir Putin? Because we hear this all the time, that he's such a slick negotiator. He knows what he wants. He can convince people. Who's the man that you know?
Well, he's a hardworking and very committed and well-prepared leader. He goes, having examined not only the file, what's going on in the front lines, but he goes through the personal file of each of the participants of a negotiating team, because that's his profession from the past as KGB agent. And, he's very, very capable to manipulate and to deceive the partner, as we have seen in the past in his talks with European leaders like Merkel and Hollande during the first war, when I was working as EU ambassador and intimately following those events from 2013 to 2017.
Absolutely fascinating to speak to you and get your insights and analysis. Thank you so much, Vygaudas Usackas, for joining us this evening.